Hi, my name is Aaron Master, and I'm the pastor of Centerpoint Church, and this is my wife.
I'm Sydney.
Thanks for tuning in to learn a little bit more about the story of how Centerpoint came to be. To get us to where we are at today, let's just say it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, it was definitely a journey.
That some of you maybe remember, but what that meant is meeting people's homes,
surviving COVID,
giving away succulents,
and doing anything that we could to reach the people here in Fond du Lac.
But before we really even dive into Centerpoint's story, I first thought I would just share a little of my background because I never would have thought I would both be in Fond du Lac. Did you?
No, not at all.
Nor did I think I would be a pastor. My parents were from Fond du Lac, so I'd visit to see the grandparents as a kid often here in Fond du Lac. But that was kind of it, which meant Fond du Lac to me was a city for the old. Growing up, I went to a good church, and out of high school, I had a faith that I guess it was lackluster at best, but to be frank, it was my family's faith. It never was my own. So when I went off to college to pursue my degrees in Spanish and education to be a teacher, which so happens to be yours
mine too, yeah.
I lived this double life of keeping the Christian title but living nothing like one. And I hated that. I hated it. I'd be partying every weekend, and then I'd come home like I did no wrong. So after a year or two of struggle, I kind of hit a rock bottom moment, or actually many moments like that, which brought me to needing something. And that something prompted me to double down on my faith, and I committed to being a follower of Jesus. After finishing my degree and being set to be a teacher, I had this opportunity thrown at me where I could turn down a full-time teaching gig and work for basically free at a church, along with a few other jobs, but it was a job where I would be able to try youth ministry out, and I would lead mission trips to Latin American countries, which I was super passionate about at that time. But I was also a bachelor and said, why not? So I gave it a shot. Quickly, that became full-time, and when that did, I went through an in-ministry program at Bethel Seminary, and I got a master's in Christian thought. After a year or two of that, I met Sydney on a mission trip.
We went to Milwaukee.
that I was leading at the time, but at that time, she was going to Ripon College. And
sounds super cliche, right? For a pastor and pastor's wife to meet on a mission trip, but that's how it happened.
And it was awesome because it led to us getting married. But in ministry, as a pastor, I was thriving with my youth ministry. We had about 100 teens plugged in weekly in our 7,000-ish person town, which is just crazy. And then on Sundays for church, we had about 700 people every week, 10% of the city. The church was booming, and I had a passion and drive to get more people even in the door. The lead and planting pastor of that church, he knew that was my passion, and he introduced me to church planting. And he helped me see that the passion to get more people in the door, to ultimately get them closer to Jesus, it tends to lead to church planting. So after years of training alongside him, coaching from him, to prepare to plant a church, it was finally time.
We looked at a few different cities kind of around the area, but nothing really stuck until we finally found Fond du Lac.
And at that time, I wasn't happy about the place. Were you?
No, not at all.
But we kept going with it by meeting with people, looking at the demographic and the percentage of church attendance, and got a clear sense from God that this is the place. Yay! Thanks, God. We weren't sure if we'd love Fond du Lac right away, but things changed, and we just fell in love with the bigness of the city, at least coming from where we were at prior, but it still had this small town feel. In 2019, 1 year before the launch of our services, the idea of a church was public, and I rallied just a handful of people together to help, and we started meeting in each other's homes, talking about what a new church in Fond du Lac would look like, of how we could reach the particular group of people who are not going somewhere currently, people who would say church is just not for them. And at that time, we knew there were about like 1,000 people attending an evangelical style church or a contemporary style church in the area. So we saw immense room for growth from that number based on what we were getting in our previous church in a much smaller town. So we started to dial in on what or who was missing in that group. who wasn't going to church here in Fond du Lac. And what we noticed was
It was a lot of really young families.
it was people who grew up in maybe a traditional style church but lost interest or lost engagement with it and then never returned.
It was people who had zero interest in a traditional church setting.
It was people who, when they think of a Christian, they didn't think they fit. We wanted to reach them, which is where our vision formed. We had a vision to be a church who reached the unchurched. So out of that, we funneled in on needing to be a church that was positive, relevant, and real to reach them. I don't know exactly where those specific words came from, but those three things stuck. And didn't we have signs?
We had yard signs.
Yeah, nice.
Positive, relevant, and real.
And a billboard.
Yeah.
But those were things that we prioritized. In addition to that, we as a team, we set our mission statement to help you take the next step in developing your relationship with God. And that step we saw could be simply showing up.
It could be starting a relationship with God, or it could be maturing and living out your faith throughout the week.
But we saw that we all have a step to take, an action. And our values, they all revolve around doing exactly that. As in, literally, all of our values are verbs or start with verbs.
They're things like reaching people where they're at with their walk with God,
Helping people start a personal relationship with God.
producing committed and growing followers of Jesus,
Serving the community, the state, the nation, and world.
and then creating opportunities for real and meaningful relationships.
With our launch team of about 25 people, maybe 11 or 10 months before the launch of our services, and an idea of what we wanted to do, our next step finally was to connect with people of Fond du Lac, to start building the church. We like to say we will do anything but sin to reach people who are far from Christ. So out of that, we went into the community, the Fond du Lac community, to connect with others. And we did some strange things. Because again, we were trying to reach people who weren't into church or weren't going somewhere or were part of that demographic. So
yeah, we held live music and connection opportunities at different bars in the area.
we served in community events, and
We gave away random yet buzzworthy items to intrigue people to check out church. Things like shot glasses with an espresso shot that said
espresso shots, and,
yes, give us a shot.
or succulents that say we don't suck,
Or candles that said we don't stink.
We also did normal things, we dropped off boxes of coffee at all the schools in town. But some of these ideas that we had, they bombed.
They were
not
terrible.
good. And maybe we're a bit too edgy, but some worked. And it got us to about March of 2020 when we had about 75 launch team people.
But if you remember what happened in March of 2020, 6 months before our launch, COVID.
Yay. COVID hit, and everything you attempt to do as a church plant just months before your launch was essentially halted. At the time, you didn't go to meet new people.
You didn't get close or connect with groups of more than 2 people.
Like you and me.
Yeah.
Or go to random places to talk with those you don't know, or serve people out and about in the community. COVID hit, and it slowed everything. And it was a scary time. I left my previous church and my previous job, and churches were closed, and we didn't know how or when they would reopen.
We were also pregnant with our first child. She was due in May, so that was scary too.
But we felt we listened to God's call to plant at this time, so we stayed the course. We did everything we could remotely, in distance or just digitally. We did everything.
We sent out flowers to people. We sent care packages.
Drop-offs of food and gift cards, and we did online services. Anything we could to engage others. And as things kind of got into the summer from that point, we had our first child.
Yeah, Eliza was born.
And during that time, we closed in on our year-long contract with the Children's Museum, and we're working in the building to create an auditorium. And
Then we had our first preview service.
Yep, a service that was meant to give people a taste of what to expect, but it was still full of distance, social distancing, masks, hand sanitizers,
Stickers. We even had stickers.
precaution.
And then come June, 2 months from the launch, we just happened to have a house fire. Yay! So it forced us to be out of our house for 6 months, and then in the process we had to redesign and build our house with a 1-month-old.
Let's just say that was the hardest time of our marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
We
Fought a lot.
We did. But we stayed the course. And as we came up on September, we had about 80 or 90 people set for our launch team, people helping make this church happen. And we were going to get it going no matter what. So on
September 13th, we launched with about 100 people in attendance, masked, distanced, and stickered, the whole thing.
But it worked.
Yeah.
And we did everything we could to continue to grow and to reach people. It was at a much slower pace than intended, but it was growing.
And it's still growing.
And from there, ever since, we have grown each year as a church. As we are just now a few years in still, we feel we are just getting started. Our hope is to still reach the unchurched of Fond du Lac. That hasn't changed, and we're still going back to our roots, doing unique things. We just hope to have you and more people like you on board to help us continually grow and connect more and more people in Fond du Lac.
Yeah, we want to see the community of Fond du Lac impacted by the ways of Jesus.
So we see it as we're just getting started.
Yeah.